Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Corey Webb, and I'm a marketing director here at ChurnZero, and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar titled Beyond ROI, Reverse Engineering the Buyer Journey for Renewal Success. Before we get started, I do want to remind everyone that we are recording today's session, and we'll be sending out follow-up emails tomorrow with a link to the recording and a PDF of the slides that you can view on demand. And then there is also a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Please go ahead and submit your questions as you have them, and we will try and get to as many as we can at the end of this webinar. So please submit those as you have them. And now I'm pleased to introduce to you our speaker today. We have Adil Dittmer. Adil is the head of customer success at TestBox, which gives revenue teams the ability to spin up live demo environments just in seconds, helping them close more deals with less effort and fewer resources than ever before. Adil has had experience on both sides of the proverbial negotiation table, and that's why we're excited to have him here today to talk to us about how to achieve a win-win outcomes for both software suppliers and customers. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Adil.
Yeah, thank you so much, Corey. So really excited to be here today. Thanks everyone for joining us. Excited to talk a little bit about this topic. So just want to introduce myself very quickly. I'm Adil. It's really nice to meet you. As Corey shared, I'm head of customer success at TestBox, and previously was in a role as director of customer success at Tropic, a procurement tech company where I helped finance, IT, and procurement teams design purchasing workflows, and got to observe 20,000 plus software purchases, new purchases, renewals, and learned so much from that, which is where a lot of my learnings that I'll share today came from. And as a fun fact, I've gotten to travel through much of North America, through my travels to different college campuses for different roles and consulting at tech CS world, as well as being an NCAA college basketball referee. So great to meet you. Feel free to reach out, email, LinkedIn. You'll be able to find me. And as far as our topic today, I'd like to share a little bit about setting the stage and the setting for where we are economically. This really shouldn't be that new to anyone that's been living this day to day in the software world. But I think it's really important because I think that has shaped how we think about ROI in our renewal conversations. And then from there, I'd like to really just, we love a good journey in customer success, but actually talk through what a renewal journey looks like for most teams that are making buying decisions, and some learnings I've had around the best ways to partner with your customers, finance and procurement stakeholders who have this kind of reputation for coming in and derailing things at the last second. But I think if we can proactively understand what they care about and what business problems that they're trying to solve, we can really come up with some good ways and offerings to help your customers look at their entire contract with you in a way that's going to help them achieve their business goals. So really excited to jump off, but before we get started, it'd just be really helpful to just get a sense of who's in the room with us today. So if folks could let me know, how are you involved in renewals at your organization? Are you personally handling those renewal discussions? Are you managing a team that oversees those renewal discussions? Are you in a team that contributes to the renewal process, CSQLs, or in another way are helping provide insights to the commercial discussion, but another team is leading that? Or if you are not involved at all and are just here to learn about a really exciting topic, that would be great as well.
All right, so the results are coming in. Let me just give it one more second to give folks a chance to respond.
Awesome. And we're seeing pretty even split across the first three groups here.
So I just shared the results out to everyone. So yeah.
Awesome. Okay, great. And so this is really helpful. And I think, whether you're someone that's personally handling these renewal discussions, hopefully today will help you think a little bit about what are some ways that you can actually think proactively about other folks that are going to be involved or interested in the commercial outcome of your contract. And if you're contributing to the team, these might be ways that you can actually help whoever's owning the renewal discussion get set up for success. So that's great. We'll jump into it a little bit. So let's set the stage a little bit. So I'm certain I don't need to tell anyone about, times are certainly hard out here. I feel like just thinking a little bit about, what has the shift in how venture capital has been deployed look like over the last few years is really telling, because in my experience, this graph has actually directly correlated with quote unquote how easy it is to secure a renewal or secure expansion at a company or a business. And so even going back to 2020, when we were hit with I don't even have to say it, global pandemic, there was still more capital deployed in that year than what we're on pace to see deployed by these venture capital firms today. And when you actually see a lot of these firms who are asked to comment on the wild west of a VC capital that was deployed in 2021, you'll often see that they don't even benchmark that year against historical means. 2021 was just so crazy and out of whack for company valuations against what we've ever seen before. So if you have come into customer success or started in a new role in customer success or a new company in the last 4 years, what you'll see is maybe your experience could be very vastly different in 1 year to the next. And it's been hard for companies, I think, to understand, is our struggle with the renewal a measure of something that we're not doing right in our market or with our product, or is this, it's very easy to point to, hey, the economic headwinds that we're facing are just really difficult as well. And and just as you think a little bit about what has this done at a macro level, right? So as the economy has slowed down, inflation has gone up and cash is no longer free for businesses, proverbially free with such low interest rates. What you see is less investments in those companies, right? And so as companies have less money, companies have been asked to cut costs. And so, this is where you see these really, sad reductions in force that happen all across the board. And as folks, as there's less job security, that leads to less consumer spending, which again contributes to the slower economy. So there's kind of this macro flywheel effect happening. But beyond just reducing costs from a personnel perspective, we're also seeing that CFOs are being asked to cut their SaaS spend 30 to 50%, right? And so what that almost does is it creates a line across all of your SaaS tools and your technology, where if you want to secure your renewal coming across to it for another year, you need to be above that's 50 to 70% line of software in one way or another. And so what I think we've seen for a lot of businesses is that everyone recognizes that the sale that they have to make, they have to resell the value of their product to everyone in their renewal. And a big component of that is something that I've noticed over and over and over again, is everyone coming back to the ROI. And what we've seen a lot of the time is that ROI can be really oversimplified to buyers. And I think I understand why this is. You see the advice over and over again, try to speak, use the language of the CFO, use the language of of your finance teams that you're working with. And so people really come back to ROI, but your return on investment, just quite literally from a definition perspective, means for every $1 you spend, you want to make $2, right? It is quite literally a mechanism to talk about, hey, every dollar that's deployed here, we need to make more money back on that. And when we look back at our previous economic conditions, where it was really easy for a company to grow by spending $1 to make $2, what that meant was as long as you could show that you were a solution that was going to help a company grow faster than its competitors, ROI was a really important thing to show. You wanted to show that your ROI would be better than the status quo of not doing anything or a competitor in the space. But the missing piece of the ROI equation is that there's a purely financial focus there, right? So it doesn't talk about the opportunity cost of not doing anything, or the opportunity cost of, can we get away without doing this? And most importantly, ROI is really difficult to show, take into account a passage of time. How long does it take to start recognizing that return on your investment. And so in an economy where companies are experimenting and trying lots of different things to grow at all costs, there's less of a pressure to get value back as quickly as possible. And you'll see a lot in customer success around time to value and time to launch, and those pieces are so incredibly important, but not necessarily to get a return on investment, but to make sure that you are getting to the point where we're actually getting to that quote unquote ROI as quickly as possible. And so what I would actually say is that I think that for a lot of folks, as you build your ROI business case for companies, over and over again, what I've seen is that companies will tend to overstate the financial impact of just their tool in isolation. So your average company has something between 50 and 70 SaaS tools in their tech stack. So if you're a solution that is selling to a marketing team or a sales team, and you're trying to quantify the revenue impact that your tool had in isolation without taking into effect that there are compounding factors, there might be 5 or 6 SaaS tools that a revenue or an account executive is using. And so trying to overestimate the value that your tool presented to the ROI of a business can oftentimes erode trust between you and your buyer around, what is the actual impact that you're providing for them. The second piece that we often see is that it fails to give your customer the true total picture of what are the potential benefits of alternative strategies. And if we really want to be strategic partners for our companies and our customers, it's really important to take into account the entire picture of what the partnership looks like. And so for a lot of companies, when we do our discovery and we're asking about the pain points that those companies have, it becomes really easy to forget about, the terms of your contract and the financial aspects of your contract are part of the partnership as well. And that's not just a financial transaction where money is exchanging hands. We really need to think about, hey, how can we be good partners and create a contract that helps our businesses, our customers, create the business value that they're looking for as well. And I'll talk about some specific examples to that in a little bit. And then finally, I think ultimately, a lot of these business cases are built on mathematical projections rather than on actually thinking about addressing our actual customer needs. And so, there's actually some pretty compelling data here that Gong has put out, that in terms of calls that they have all their data on from a revenue intelligence perspective, presenting ROI at any point in your sales process can result in a 27% drop in close rates. And so I think if there's any takeaway that I would have from that, it would be that we need to stop focusing on what is the business case for buying something, which is a very logical way to go about trying to convince a customer to buy your tool, and start thinking about the ways and empathetically thinking about how do people make buying decisions, both psychologically and internally from a process perspective, and reverse engineer the answers that they want to present best possible solution for them and secure that renewal as well. So I think I've made my point clear now. I really feel like it's time for us to have a retirement party for our ROI calculators. I think ROI calculators have had a great run. They've done a lot for us, but it's time for us to think very critically about how we could do this. No offense to anyone that's on this call who's got an ROI calculator hanging out on their company's homepage, which realistically probably hasn't ever been used by a customer before, if we're being honest. But we really want to think about some different ways to help our customers understand what's the importance of having a long-term solution and working together. And so I'd love to just kind of get a sense from the crowd now, how do we think about understanding our customers' renewal steps internally? And want to know if you have a playbook to actually learn those steps and really understand the buying process and buying journey from your customer's perspective. So 1, you document your customer's timeline, you understand when they're going into their budgeting season, and what their criteria are for renewing your tool. Two, you ask about their process, but you don't have a clear operational rigor around how you go about making sure that you address those. Three, not really. We base our renewal playbook based on the contract end date. 90 days before that date, we do X. 60 days before that date, we do Y. It's not based on what our customers do. And then four, it's okay if you don't have playbooks yet. That's why we're here. We're here to learn. So we can always get there.
Give it just another second for folks to select their answers. Okay, let me share out the results.
All right. Okay. So it's just as I suspected. Folks tend to have renewal playbooks here that are very based on you and your internal process, right? We reverse engineer steps based on when a renewal date, when our contract end date is. And again, that, 120 days before that, we look at if there are any risks, and then we run a playbook, and we do any churn mitigation technique playbooks, and so on and so forth. And very few people are asking themselves, okay, well, the problem with that is if a customer signed their contract with you in June, and 120 days before that is March, but they're actually making their budgeting decisions, actually for a lot of companies right around now in November, you're not actually proactively meeting them where they are around understanding what they're going to be evaluating, or what their criteria is, or what their financial position is, or what their budget is going to look like for next year. So even in cases where you secure a renewal and you have a really strong health for a customer, and you know that your tool, whether you're not really at risk of a churn, which I think in this economy, there's always some level of risk. But even in those cases, what you'll find is that companies will have budgeted already, like pre-budgeted an amount that they're going to be able to spend for you. So even when there's great expansion opportunity or expansion potential, if you haven't worked with your customer to understand what their buyer journey is, you haven't given them an opportunity to really make that internal business case for more budget to expand for customers that you might have some white space as well. So that's why I think that this is a really important piece of understanding what our customers' journeys are. So what is that buyer renewal journey? Okay, so we're going to kind of go through this. I'm not going to go through step by step, but we love a customer journey. We love a journey and customer success. And the big thing that I want to think about here is, I think we often think about decisions that are the buying journey in terms of stages, because that's how our CRMs display those to us, right? And it's a very linear stage by stage thing. And oftentimes, what I'd want everyone's takeaway from this to be is that there are a lot of the decision to purchase something is a pretty complex thing, and there's parts of the purchase where there's a lot of concurrent conversations happening. There's parts of the equation where there are dependencies. We can't move forward until we understand X or Y or Z. And so, for most companies, that renewal evaluation starts is going to be very different from one company to the next, which is another reason why that just starting 120 days out before renewal doesn't work, right? Some companies have a great mechanism in place to know when they should start evaluating new tools for every supplier that they have in their tech stack. Sometimes it's based off of your opt-out, the opt-out date in the contract. Sometimes it'll be based on the budgeting season. So knowing when that evaluation starts is really important. And then oftentimes they're going to do an analysis on, are we using this tool? Are we getting value out of this in any way? Which features in this tool are we using? Are there opportunities for us to consolidate tools? Or do we have a duplication of different features between different tools that our team struggles with because they don't know where to do X or Y task that's required of them in their work streams because there's multiple tools that they have that do that. And there's typically some level of feedback collection that's happening, and then an analysis of how well are we integrating with the rest of the tech stack, right? Which is becoming more and more important every day, just as we think about being really efficient in our workflows and being able to to work from one place and not have to click back and forth from 8 different tabs in our browser for 8 different tools that help us do our jobs. And try to understand what's going on with vendors, right? We don't always do the best job of helping our buyers understand what new and impressive features have come out of the course of the last year. But I would say that most buyers do their research. They want to know, hey, what are some things that we can do with our existing tools that we couldn't do before? And what are the competitors out there doing as well? We should never be scared that we should assume that our customers are always staying abreast of what's going on between your competitors. And you should never be scared for them to have a conversation with someone else if we are delivering the value that we promise them, right? And so oftentimes they'll do an assessment of what would it look like to have alternative solutions or to get rid of this tool altogether. And then we get into our contract terms and our negotiations, right? So deciding exactly what we need, how much we need of it, how much we can spend on it. And then if you're a tool that's going to need that your customer is going to decide to switch, there's oftentimes a transition planning or a need to evaluate other tools as well. And then a final approval is made. So I want to go back to so we understand here if we have our process of how renewal decisions are made, there's also just what's going on logically with our customers as well, right? And so I always say it's important to think about the psychology of buying. And the reality here is that the human brain has 2 parts. We have the emotional side of our brain and logical side of our brain. And most buying decisions are made with the emotional part of the brain, right? And so people will buy with emotion and then they will justify with logic. I think this is one of those reasons that those numbers-based ROI calculations don't resonate with customers, is because it's asking your customer to make a logic-based decision, right? And ultimately, at its most basic level, I think the pro of the fact that people make decisions in an emotional way is that no one wakes up in the morning just super excited to cancel a contract with their supplier and go out there and implement an entirely new tool. So in that sense, from a customer success perspective or a retention perspective, you've got your leg up that anyone that's made a buying decision to buy your product wants you to be successful and wants themselves to look good too, right? And so what they'll be looking for is logical ways to justify their purchase. And that's where we need to come in and kind of speak to that emotional side of helping people understand where they are. And one of the best ways that you can do that is by using stories. And so there's a lot of great folks out there that share great tips and tricks on how to use stories to share your business, share the narrative of how your customers are using your tool back to them. And I would say it's really important to really focus on a before and after customer story with everyone as you're looking to secure that renewal. Beyond just speaking in terms of raw ROI numbers. And so one thing I think about here is, as you think about just people make purchases from a place of having a pain point. Another piece is, as people have to look at their 30 to 50% of tech tools that they need to get rid of, everyone made that purchase when they had a pain. But the reality is that pain feels like the harshness of a pain that you feel tends to lessen over time, right? So, anyone here that's ever suffered an emotional loss probably knows that over time, it's not as fresh or as harsh as it was in the moment. And so oftentimes we need to use our stories to remind people of what their pain point was before and after, rather than assuming that they'll remember that before they bought your solution, things were really challenging and they couldn't do it. What most customers are going to think here is that if we were getting by without you before, maybe we can get by without you again. When you're in this economy where folks need to make really tough decisions about what tools in their tech stack to maintain or not. So how do we do this? Very, very tactically. I think if you go back to this buyer journey, this renewal journey, it's really important to just reverse engineer specific stages, what's happening at your customer, and proactively work with them to figure out, hey, what are the ways that we can actually present stories or work with you to understand what you need to continue the partnership from a contracting terms perspective or from a license perspective. What's happened in the story of the customer that you're working with that can help you with license optimization? If your customer had a reduction in force, and so they're contracted for a set number of seats, and they have shelfware, which is another term for seats that aren't being used for anyone anymore. How can you show you're a good partner? By reaching out to them proactively and saying, hey, I understand that you don't need all these seats anymore. Is there a way that we can restructure your contract and offer you better terms that'll work for where your business is today, and extend our partnership and lock in our partnership for longer, because we want to be a long-term partner with you. And in the future, when you expand again, we'll hope that you found that we were a really good partner in this difficult situation you're in, and you'll expand back with us, right? So those are proactive things that if you're thinking about from a forecasting perspective, we don't get into that tug of war at our renewal time around, offering a me-based renewal offering that starts at, I'm just going to build a business case around keeping the customer at 100% revenue retention because that's what I need to do to hit my number, versus coming in and coming proactively to certain customers, understanding their story and what we need to do to create a good partnership as part of the contract terms. How are you working with your customers to understand what the market looks like and how you're solving for their pain in a way that no one else can? How are you integrating with their tech, their tools? What are you doing in your adoption playbooks to make sure that there are no concerns about how they're utilizing your product or your platform? And so, as I kind of numbered out 4 specific places, here are like 4 very tactical strategies for those 4 different areas that I think we can look at. I kind of already gave a high level overview of this, but the usage analysis part of the buyer, when your customer's finance team is asking them to defend how much money they're spending, they're going to have to tell a story about how they're using your product. So what stories can you arm them with that outline how that business changed before and after implementing your product, reminding them about the pain that they had before, that before and after story? The integration analysis. How can you share stories about how you've integrated data sources from your product into a fully unified experience? Maybe you don't directly integrate with a CRM or a source of truth that your customers are working in every day, but having the self-awareness to know where your limitations are in terms of integrating into the workflows of your customer can potentially help you come up with proactive customer-centric solutions where you can work through the strategy of how you can help them. Maybe it's you actually have a cadence meeting where you work through the things, you provide the things to your customer, or some digital strategies where you're delivering the information and data that someone needs through some automated mechanism, or even an email, whatever that looks like for you in your business, wherever it is, to make sure that you're integrating within the work streams of the teams that you're working with, right? Because in today's world, as companies and customers have to do as much as they used to with less resources, there's an extreme value in showing that you can integrate into the new world that their customers are living in. Market evaluation. If you are having customers that are coming to you from other vendors, there are stories that those customers have about what their experience was with some of those vendors that you can now use to help inform and educate your customers about what their experience, how their experience might be different if they were to ever switch away from you as well, right? And so this is not a cry to go out there and speak ill of any of your competitors. I would never recommend that. The tech world is a small world. Everything comes back to everyone. And the fact of the matter is that just doesn't reflect well. But still, being able to be a consultant and help people understand, hey, if you were to switch off of our tool to another tool, here's a cost you might not be thinking about that we heard other customers had to spend money on as well, right? So what is that total cost of ownership of a tool? What does that cost of switching look like? So those are some ways to create playbooks around proactive stories that you can share when you know your customers are doing an evaluation of other tools in the market. And then finally, the renewal discussion. What levers align with the current economic factors and for your customers' organizational needs as well, right? So what whether it's offering an extended term, what do different payment terms look like for your customer? How can you rationalize licenses in a way that's going to show your customer that you're willing to work with them and partner with them? Those are all really important ways to think of your customer success relationship around helping your customer be successful, not just in using your product, but have a successful business strategy as well, right? And so I think I heard recently a CRO share that customer success managers need to get out of the friend zone and be comfortable having these revenue-based conversations with folks, because this is a business relationship. And so we have to be able to talk about the business partnership as well, beyond just how customers are using our software as well. So then ultimately, I guess just to kind of pull this back to what do we think our procurement experts, what is going through our procurement experts' minds? What is going through finance's mind when these roadblocks come in at the end of a renewal cycle? And so I just want to share some very practical things that they're thinking about that we can use to go beyond just talking about the ROI of our software when we're negotiating our contract renewals, okay? And so I think sometimes there's a little bit of a rep that like procurement is just here to get the best possible price, or finance only cares about how many dollars are spent. But I think if we can lead with a little bit more empathy and think about what are the goals of these organizations, it's not just the bottom line, but it's also thinking about the top line as well too. So, if you think about, for example, cash flow management, for a lot of businesses right now, where one of the most important things for them is how they can, improve or stabilize their cash flow. So if you have ways to reduce their upfront costs or extend payment terms to reward your most loyal customers, those are going to be things that can help your customer's business situation while also maintaining your renewal as well. And I think one of the most important things to talk about here is that the earlier you can have these conversations with your customer around what their renewal cycle is going to look like and what is really important for them as a business from a cash flow management perspective, the better you're going to be able to forecast which customers you need to be really flexible with some of these terms, and where you need to maybe draw a harder line in the sand for some of your other customers based on what their internal situations are. So when we shared that poll earlier where we talked about a renewal playbook, just working backwards from your renewal date, you actually give up leverage and being able to understand what are some of the levers and offerings or give to take scenarios that you can have with your customer to set yourself up for a win-win situation. Another thing that we talk about a lot within procurement in the finance world is risk mitigation, right? So the reality of the situation is companies, the reason ROI isn't really compelling is companies spend a lot of money on tools that don't offer a direct ROI, right? Most security tools are meant to protect companies from what could be the worst day in their company's history and not necessarily help them make more money, spend money to make money, right? And so being able to share a convincing narrative that shows how you are minimizing financial and operational risk with your tool is a really compelling value story that goes beyond ROI with a procurement and finance stakeholder, right? So this economy isn't a time for companies to make big bets and kind of just deploy cash on a bunch of different tools and see what works best and then stick with that. So this is where it's really important to show, hey, sticking with us is going to really reduce your risk. Here are things that we're doing that can actually help your team financially and operationally be really successful. And if your value is tied to the ROI of how many your customers' teams are using your tool, there's a level of risk there, because if the company has less people on their team using your tool, if there's a license reduction or a reduction in force, that inherently reduces the ROI for the customer, right? So we have to think about other ways to tell that story about mitigating risk. Operational efficiency, I think we feel this on the customer success side so much. And so it's certainly something that we can empathize with our customers as well. Streamlining processes, reducing waste, consolidating other tools in the tech stack, having a knowledge of what are common ways that your customer works is really, and what are the tools that they do to accomplish their job, is a great way to kind of help meet with them and talk to them through, hey, maybe this could be a little bit more operationally efficient if you used our feature, which is good enough, but maybe not as good as this other point solution that is expensive and requires your team logging into another tool to accomplish something, right? So you see a lot of this consolidation of tools towards more platform offerings, and there's a direct tie to operational efficiency that comes with that. And then finally, we've continued to see over and over again that solutions that offer ongoing pricing flexibility are going to be inherently stickier right now for their customers. The reality of the situation is that no one really knows what the future holds right now. So that like risk and uncertainty, we keep seeing uncertain times everywhere as we talk about the economy that we're in. So the more flexible you can be from a solution perspective, the more your customer is going to be willing to partner with you and move you up that stack rank list of software tools that they're going to look for ways to try and keep on as well. And so that's just something to think about. I think sometimes this piece requires companies to take a good hard look at themselves, like take a look in the mirror and think about a little bit of like, what would it look like for our customer to switch to one of our competitors? Are we truly offering something that just can't be replicated in any way? There are categories of tools out there, and I'm not just going to like point the finger at anyone, where you have 4 or 5 tremendously useful, comparable tools to accomplish specific goals within specific verticals. And so if you can think to yourself that oftentimes, companies will be the most aggressive with discounts when someone is purchasing a new tool for the first time because of the way the incentives are aligned, that means that the switching costs might actually be less if you don't get flexible with your pricing upon renewal as well. So that's something that's just important to think about when you look in the proverbial mirror and think about the market that you're in, to make sure that you don't push your customer into a situation where they have to evaluate a competitor of yours just to get a competitive quote that's going to force you to bring your price down. If you can be proactive in providing a partnership and opportunities that's going to compel them to lock themselves into a longer term deal, that's going to be a good reason to do this up front. So finally, just as far as some key takeaways, I can't say enough. I do think that ultimately this, if you are to do one thing today, it would be, go look at your renewal deck. And if you see that a central part of your renewal deck is 2 to 3 slides where your CSM, where you as a CSM or your CSM team has to pull together some stats to calculate ROI as the primary driver for renewal, think about that a little bit. Like, is that the story? Is that the speaking to the emotional side of your buyer's brain that's going to trigger the need for them to sign that renewal, right? And think about, are there ways that you can look more strategically around building a value story that can help you not get into this back and forth over price that's just centered on what is the ROI that someone has with your tool? If your health score is heavily architected on what the ROI is that your customers are getting from your software or product, versus looking at maybe some more qualitative things like how many verified business outcomes did you accomplish together over the course of your partnership? Those might be some things that you might think about as well. Then being proactive with your renewal strategy as well, right? Work it into your process really early on. I would say even in implementation, if you can, to understand how the customer is going to need, like what the culture is at your customer's company around justifying a renewal and going into year 2 or year 3 or whatever the case may be after that initial contract is set up. Figuring it out then instead of when you enter your renewal motion is going to help you have much more time to be able to work backwards and figure out where you can maximize your leverage. Negotiations is all about leverage at the end of the day. There's a lot of books out there that talk about negotiation techniques and never split the difference, and those are all like really great reads. But when it really comes down to it, at its most like basic form, negotiations are all about leverage. And the more time you give yourself and options you have, the more leverage you have to really be able to offer options to your customers as well. And then finally, I'd say it's always about building stronger customer relationships. So you can build trust with your customers by showing that you understand their financial challenges, particularly if you're a software tool that's not working with the finance team directly or with the operations team directly. It could be really easy for you to just focus all your conversations about the part of the business that you help impact. But by like zooming out your lens to make sure you're having conversations about the challenges that your customers are facing as a business, you're going to have a stronger, longer lasting relationship. And you can offer renewal options that'll help show them that you really understand them in that way as well. So these are some key takeaways here, and kind of excited to talk through, if there are any questions here, love to talk through those.
Awesome. Thanks you, Adil. We have had questions come in, but I want to invite the rest of the audience to please go ahead and submit your questions, and we'll get to as many as we can. And I will kick things off with the questions that have come in. So the first question is, if we want to begin establishing a better renewal process that relies less on 90 days from contract renewal date, what tactical next steps do you suggest we employ to better understand when these renewal conversations should actually begin? This seems like it could be a big undertaking for our CSMs who handle 100+ accounts.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I actually really like, that specific example. So what if you have 100 accounts there? And so you want to think about your digital strategies here, right? And so if you were to take the renewal journey and just ultimately kind of break that down into categories of common steps that pretty much every company is doing as they're evaluating their renewal, you can develop a survey that basically asks very tactical questions that says something like, when do you do your budgeting season? Who needs to be involved in these decisions, right? Things that we do, I think our sales team are hardwired to do that level of discovery to really figure out exactly what the buying process is in the initial sale. And sometimes we don't do as good of a job of that on the renewal. And I will say, from seeing so many new purchase and renewal new purchases, for a lot of companies, the renewal is a simpler process than a new purchase. But for a lot of companies, it's exactly the same. They redo their security review every year. They redo these things. So if you can digitize a way of sending out surveys or something just to get as much kind of proactive data back and bucket your customers into where they are, you can create tasks for your customers around their calendar instead of focusing on your calendar and the automated alerts that you get.
Awesome. I like that idea. Our next question says, how do we establish internal standards that will empower our CSMs to know how to have discussions related to renewal and pricing flexibility? Yeah,
great question. And so I do think that there's a level of assumption I'm making here around, it depends on the maturity of the business that you have, for sure, right? So more mature companies are going to have we'll call it more steps and decision makers involved around what the internal standards are for those renewal discussions. What I'd say in those cases is like the most important thing is to empower your team with understanding what they do have the flexibility to do. So, for example, if you work at a company where, CSMs have to run discounts by an escalation to a manager or a deal desk or something like that, that's going to be really difficult to scale this. But if there's a threshold where CSMs, maybe you propose, hey, up to this level of discount, CSMs are empowered to make this offering, or CSMs are allowed to go from net 30 terms to net 45 terms. Understand all those levers and not just the price part. I think you actually enable your organization to scale more by enabling people to make more decisions for themselves across what can they do across their whole book of business, and not just handling this on one-offs with every single renewal that comes up.
Yeah, I like that. Giving people some guardrails to know how to get that renewal. Let's see. Our next question says, if we focus our renewal conversations on other non-ROI factors, how should we handle conversations where the buyer shifts to a pure monetary, money saved, money earned conversation?
Yes. Okay. So I'm so glad someone asked this question, because I am not saying never talk about ROI. I am saying don't present ROI if as your central story, if that's not what the customer has asked for. So the key to all this is empathy, right? It's what does the customer care about? So some people will make their buying decision based on ROI. And if they've told you that, we need to then partner with them to understand, okay, how are they calculating ROI internally? And how can I help them make that business case, show them what that conversation is. Oftentimes what I've seen with the ROI perspective is like, you might internally calculate ROI in like this one rigid way over and over and over again, and your customer might calculate ROI differently. So from a procurement perspective, there's this idea of like cost avoidance. Like we could have had to pay a 4% uplift, but we didn't, and that counts as as something that's tangible value. And then there's just cost reduction. Like last year we paid $100,000. This year we paid $90,000. That was a $10,000 in cost reduction. So if you're calculating ROI one way and your customer is calculating ROI another way, your ROI equation is not going to matter to them anyways. So just make sure that if you're having that ROI conversation, it's based in what the customer wants to talk about, and you are doing the calculation that they are, so that you are aligned on you're not spending your tug of war time arguing about what the ROI is, and instead you're focusing on, how are they calculating value, and did it meet the standard where they're going to be willing to sign off on that renewal?
That makes a lot of sense. Need to level set the customer. Our next question says, what and when should the customer receive the first touch point about the renewal? Or maybe how and when?
So I was pretty proud of myself for getting this far into the webinar without going with it depends answer. But I think I have to our favorite answer in customer success. I do think it's gonna come back to it depends on this one, right? So this one you can be a little selfish too, in terms of I know everything I've talked about is about centering the customer and being empathetic, but the reality is, and someone shared this in a question earlier, if you've got over 100 accounts, like there's going to be a level of prioritization that you have to do at some point as well. And so I think the key thing that I would say here is that if your signals are telling you that you're having a high percentage of your renewal conversations that are turning into a back and forth, where your initial proposal isn't strong enough for your customer to say, okay, I'm going to evaluate these options, come back to you, pick something and move on, then you're adding operational overhead from an efficiency standpoint. And one of the ways you can do that is by having your first touch point earlier, right? And so I think there's kind of a little bit of experimentation that has to happen here, where when you hit the smooth spot where for the majority of your renewals, you're not having to go back and forth. I think if we have back and forths, that's a really key signal and metric for me to say we're either not hitting the mark on getting in front of our customers early enough to help them make these decisions, or we're not speaking the same language they are in terms of how they're making their renewal or buying decisions internally. So I think those are two signals you can go off of to say we need to get in front of them earlier. But I wouldn't be so bold as to say you need to reach out to them at least this far and ahead in advance as a blanket answer.
Got it. Yeah, thanks for that specificity there, because we did have another question that came in about how many touch points, and I think the goal is probably obviously trying to lessen that amount,
Exactly.
especially if there's a lot of back and forth, like you said.
Yep.
Okay, let's see. So we have a question that says, do you have any recommendations for handling a significant across the board price increase for all customers?
Yeah, so I think the recommendation I would say here is when this happens, and let's say that there's like an internal business decision where we need to do that, we see that. Anticipate, like, kind of almost I think I saw someone say this earlier this week, like skate to where the objection puck is going, like, and just anticipate and expect there to be pushback from a large percentage of these customers, right? And so you can set your team up for success here by saying, okay, like, here are the talking points for why we're doing the price increase. Here's the value, here's the why behind it, here's the value behind it. But ultimately, like, your customers are going to see that for it's a self-serving thing that you need to do. And so you just have to expect that there's a higher level, higher bar that you're going to need to meet to justify the renewal for that customer. So I think, like, as much enablement as you can do for proactive helping your CS team, like, manage those objections and those questions is going to be really helpful. Expect every customer to push back. Expect every happy customer is budgeting to spend no more than they spent last year with you. Every less than happy customer is having internal discussions that they can do without you. And so if you start with that hypothesis and work backwards for how you can secure the renewal, I think you'll end up with more closed ones at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think that's some good advice. And I think you hit on a very good point there, that enablement is a very big key to making sure those price increases go smoothly. Let's see. We have a question that says, what are your thoughts on offering incentives for early renewals?
Yeah. So I think, like, with most companies, like, if you can the earlier you can get your renewal, I think it kind of goes back to that operational overhead. So I think I'm a big fan, right? I mean, the majority of renewal conversations ultimately come down to, it's like what value am I getting for exchanging this money, right? And so yeah, if you can operationalize incentivizing your customers to sign a renewal early or sign a longer term contract, it's going to depend on the business's, like, your own internal business's financial position and goals. But those are certainly great ways to make sure that you are kind of partnering with your customers ahead of time and saying, look, like, I know I've noticed things are tough. A lot of our customers that we're working with are struggling with their budgets for next year. Things are going really well with our partnership. If you'd be willing to just commit to a longer partnership here are some things that we can offer you. And then to the point about reverse engineering your buyer's journey, if you know when they're in budgeting season, it's not just the what you offer, but when. So if you can make that offer to them 4 weeks before they go into their budgeting cycle, that's going to make much more impact for your customer than it is if it's 4 weeks after they're done budgeting. So that's just something to think about.
Got it. Okay. Next question. Let's see. Do you think CSMs should try and have a meeting with the customer's finance and procurement team before renewal, or get the information about how they operate and their goals via their main POC?
I think that's a great question. So a lot of that I think will depend about, like, I guess size of the segment or size of customer that you're working with, certainly. The reality is it's probably not scalable for you to create more points of contacts at your customers that care about like more things. So you want to be able to, going back to that enablement word, enable your main point of contact to be able to have those conversations internally as well. And so I do think like there are certainly people that you might work with, depending on the vertical you're in, who they might not have a really strong grasp of what their internal like renewal process is. Like they make a recommendation to a manager or to someone else in their organization about what they're going to purchase. And so enabling them to have the questions, if they're kind of seemingly uncertain about what steps are going to take to secure renewal, or maybe they're new to the organization. They're like, well, I actually haven't like renewed any software before, so I'm actually not sure how this works. Just like giving them the playbook and the questions of like, here's some things that you should think about. Like, I don't want to get to a point where you and I are really happy and I'm helping you do your job really well, and then you go try to make a business case to your finance, your head of finance, your head of operations, even in a smaller company, like there might not even be procurement involved. So, and find that there was a process that you didn't know to follow internally. So just helping them kind of walk through those steps, I think, is the best way to do that. Not necessarily signing CSMs up for more meetings right now. Not something that folks would be excited to hear about in today's day and age, for sure.
Yeah. Okay. I think that makes sense. Let's see. Can you give some examples of some more customer-friendly pricing or payment options that kind of aim to work for both the company's goals and the customer's financial situation?
Yeah, definitely. So I think like typically when you're thinking about terms, you're gonna want to think about, so like the total contract value. So if you're on a the total contract value and then the annual cost of your contract. So if you're on a 1-year contract, the total contract value is just the cost of that 1 year. But if you're on a 2-year contract or a 3-year contract, how can you set up those payments terms in a way, or that cost in a way that maybe scales with the expected growth of the company? So maybe they pay less upfront or whatever that might look like. Payment terms are also going to be important too, right? So that's how many days does the company have to pay the invoice that they receive is going to help them with managing their cash flow as well. Oftentimes companies will just ask to just like not have an auto renewal clause in their contract, right? Like that's something that is very beneficial for us from a scaling perspective for our own businesses. But the reality is like if someone if you are trying to lock someone into a renewal just by saying they contractually can't get out of it, like that's not really a place of partnership. And so you kind of put them almost in a bind to be like, okay, fine, like we'll pay you 1 more year, but like you're almost guaranteeing that they might go elsewhere in a year after that, right? And depending on where you're at as a business, that might be the case as well. So like payment terms, length of contract, when people have to pay different amounts on that contract, the number of years in a contract, those are all things that can be levers to push and pull on to help you with your customer.
Awesome. Okay, let's see. We have 1 more minute, so one more question. Do you think QBRs should still play a role in the renewal process if we're not focusing strictly on ROI?
Wow, it's a great question, right? We can do a whole should we do QBRs? I'm not going to offer an opinion on that one. That's for another time.
Okay. Well,
Yeah, I mean,
it.
so I think yes, right? Like I think if you're at an organization that's doing QBRs, And you're doing it in the way that we all say that we want to, which is have a strategic conversation with your customers about what matters to them. I think there's an opportunity to bring up in those conversations, hey, like this is still a business relationship. What is important to you as a business right now from a financial perspective? Like every organization, if even nonprofits need to make money from a sustainability perspective, every organization is trying to make money. So bringing that conversation into your business review in a way that just says, I'm trying to understand how you're thinking about spending money on your partners and your tech partners, your software tools, the products that you're working. So that's a really important part of the partnership, and having that in the business review would be a good place to do it. What I'm reading between the lines on here is maybe we don't automatically put together the same ROI slide for every single customer in a QBR, because that's a scalable way of us like oversimplifying how we've delivered value for every customer.
Yeah, I think you said it well there. Well, thank you, Adil, and thank you everyone who joined us today. I just want to remind you that we did record the session. We'll be sending it out in an email tomorrow with a link to the recording and a PDF of the slides. At the end of this webcast, you'll see a quick survey pop up. We'd appreciate if you would just take a minute before logging off to complete that to provide your feedback. And thank you again for joining us, and I hope everyone has a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.